So in this video, I wanted to show you openstagecontrol. Openstagecontrol is great for quickly setting up OSC control interfaces, and the major benefit is that stagecontrol will run on almost any web browser. So it runs a server on a computer, and then you can access it from almost any web browser, be that your mobile phone, an iPad, another laptop, on the same network. So openstagecontrol runs in a server client configuration. So you need a server running that'll host the web server, and then any client machine just uses a web browser to connect to it. So when we first open openstagecontrol, this is the window we're greeted with. This is to start the server. Now we can set up a whole lot of default things in here, and if you click on any of these, it'll tell you down here what those are. So an IP and a port number. For Resolume, for a local, it would be 127.0.0.1, semicolon, 7000 for the port. I like to keep this separate and I like to put it in the project. I'll show you why a bit later. But I do want to set my receiving port. And this is the port that OSC will come back into this program from Resolume, and that is 7001 by default in Resolume, and we can have the default load, but because it's starting a new project, we'll hit play and we'll start. Now there's nothing here at the moment, and we'll start a new session. There we go. So this is where we set it up. We've got a project tree just here and an inspector for the details for the widgets. So first of all, let's create a new widget, add widget slider, and we'll create a fader for our Resolume fader. And whilst we're here, let's create some buttons. So we'll create a basic button as well. Maybe two. For a couple of clips. Now let's look at Resolume. First, I'll just double check my OSC settings. Preferences, OSC, I'm receiving on port 7000 and I'm outputting on port 7001. That's correct. Now I want to get the OSC address for this fader. So I get OSC shortcuts, OSC, first one, layers, video opacity. I'll copy that and note that flag type tag is a float. So back in openstagecontrol, I'll select that. Under OSC, under the address, I'll paste that in. And my type tag is a float, so just letter F is enough. And the target, this is where we set the IP address and the port number. So it's 127.0.0.1, port number 7000. And if we look at both, I'll turn off my shortcuts, and that should be controlling Resolume. Just make sure we have that starter tag right there, and there we go. Now I don't want to have to type this in every time, this target IP address, but I do want to be able to change it easily. So there's another type of widget for that. I use a widget variable. So if I change the variable here, I'll call this OSC underscore R, and the value will be where I'm saving this. So 127.0.0.1, port number 7000. So I'll save that. That way I can use this variable over and over again in my project. I could have multiple variables being used for different IP addresses for different systems running. So if I delete this, I'm going to use some JavaScript just to reference that. So if I go at curly bracket, and the widget ID is OSC underscore R. If I click on that, I'll see that it's actually computed that value down to 127.0.0.1 as it should have. So we can double check that just by clicking on it. And if we look at Resolume, we're still connected. Now I want to get these two buttons as well. So I'll grab those details from Resolume again. Under Shortcuts, Edit OSC, and that will be this one now. For clip 1, so I'll copy that. This time it's an integer of 0 or 1. Turn off, and I'll jump back in at openstagecontrol. Back in openstagecontrol, this time let's paste it. We'll change the ID. Let's paste it there. I'll get rid of that first bracket. This time the type tag is I, and the target again is at OSC underscore R. Because as we can see, if you click here, by default it will take the widget ID, this is the ID, put a slash, widget ID, that's what auto is. So we can leave this one blank and just use that naming. So I'll do that for button 2 as well, paste that in there, get rid of that first bracket, that first slash, change it to 2, type tag is integer, or I, and the target is the same at OSC. Now, these are latching on at the moment, so I want to turn that off. And that is under the button options, set that to mode tap. Just so we hit them once and now flash. Again, mode tap. There is also an option to label it here, so I'll just hit that clip 1, and the second one can be clip 2. And now if we look at both screens, clip 1, clip 2, 1, 2, and my fader. Okay, so now I've got that set up, I want to build out an interface to control all my layers and a whole lot of my clips. And there are many ways to do this, but I could do this by individual clip, and copying and pasting all those values would be a very tedious and repetitive task, and I'm prone to make a lot of mistakes. So we're going to use a couple of techniques just to make this a lot faster, so we don't have to input a lot of information over and over again. So I've got my OSC tag here. I need to keep remembering to put that in, the OSC R. And now for layer 1, to get things organized, we're going to add a widget that is a container or a panel. And so we're going to put a whole lot of widgets inside of this, all as layer 1. So let's add a new fader. Slider fader. For the opacity. Now we're going to be using all the stuff in layer 1. So if we check out what the address was for all these items, it all starts with the same /composition layers 1. So that part is going to be the same for all of them. So let's name our container that. This is our container. So that ID will paste in composition/layers/1 as our ID. That makes a lot more sense. So now for my first fader, I want the ID to be the ID of this container, plus I want to add in some extra details. So to change the ID, we're going to need some JavaScript. To do that, to run that, hashtag curly bracket. I'm going to target this time the parent ID. So at parent. So there's a curly bracket again, like with our OSC tags, at parent.id. We'll get the parent ID. And then we want to add /video-opacity, which is the rest of our OSC command. And then we need to close off those curly brackets. Hit enter save. And if we look at this, we're now pulling down all of those details. Composition layers 1, video opacity. Now if we move down, our type tag we know from before is a float, so we'll just hit F. And our target is targeting the @OSC_R variable. Now just to make sure things are working, we can see this is actually controlling the slider above because they have the same OSC path. And we're now sending it straight to Resolume as well. Alright, now let's chuck in some buttons. And I still don't want to copy and paste all these again either. So we're going to use another widget container. This time we'll use a matrix. And a matrix will give us a whole lot of this objects that are similar. And these could be anything. These could be a switch, these could be faders, like before. But for this, we just want buttons, exactly the same as what we have up here. And they use the same parameters as a normal button. But we need to tell this what to be. So straight up, first of all, let's make 8 for now. So under the matrix, we'll say we want 8 of these buttons. I'll drag them out. Resolume doesn't call it 0, so we'll start at number 1, set the start to 1. Now we have 8 buttons. You can see they're latching on. Also, if I click and hold, they're actually turning on together. So I'll turn that off. That's called traversing. I'll just set that to false. You may like that to scroll through your clips, but I don't want to hold and drag. Alright, so we want to match the details, so we can actually call any of the properties from these buttons. So we have with mode tap. So back in the matrix, under properties, we want to change the mode to tap. Now they all tap. So we can just keep adding more and more properties in here. So what do we want next? Mode was tap. We need to set a type tag of integer, and we need to set our target. So back in here, comma and a new line, our type tag is just I. And our target is at OSC. Okay, now we need to send these, we need to get the OSC address for all these. And right now, what they're just sending is a single number. So we need to pull that out. Now we need to give each of our buttons a unique ID. To do that, we'll change the ID tag, ID, and our ID will be, again, from the parent, so in a string, run some script at parent.id, close those brackets, and then clips 1/connect. And that would be clip 1. But we actually need to change this number, which is right in the middle here, which is a little bit difficult, for every single one of those buttons. Now to do that, there's a variable we can take under the props. This $ variable will change. So we can add that in here. So if we add in some more script, and we just want to get that $ variable. But delete these two now. Once set the ID, just to be sure, we'll send that also as the address field. Just copy that down with a slash. And now if we check in Resolume through rows, we can see we're triggering each of those clips. Let's also give us a label, rather than just that number, call it clip as well. So label field, we want to name it clip, space, same script, pull that variable for the number, close the bracket, maybe capital C. And there we go, we've named all those clips. Let's tie this up a little quickly. Let's make this horizontal. So if we click on that fader, horizontal, set that to true. I'll move this out of the way a little bit. I'll shrink that down. And let's also add quickly, just whilst we're here. All right, so now we have layer 1 ready to go. We need to do this for every layer. I'll delete this one out in our project. Now, rather than rebuilding this every single time and changing those values again, there's another shortcut to do this. And for this, we're going to use a clone widget. So under widget, containers, clone. This looks like an empty container. But this is, if we open this up, it wants us to take an ID from another widget. This time we'll steal it from widget 1, copy that, and paste it in there. Hit enter, and we can see that's already done a copy of our layer 1 container. Right now it's copying it exactly, which is not what we want. We need this one to change. So if we have a look at this container, there's a property here. And what we want to change is we want to change the ID. So if we have a look, same way we did with the matrix, the ID property, and we want to name that now. Copy this. This time 2. Saving that, we now have separate controls. If we open up the 2 layers, layer 2, and the fader, layer 1 fader, and our clips. Now, because this is a clone, any change we make now populates. If I wanted to make this maybe 12 buttons now, I'll scale that out a bit. I now have 12 on each. Bring these into match. Let's add a label as well. So I add new widget, indicator, text, layer 1. Okay, I want this to be horizontal text, so up here, vertical, true. If I move that just in front of the fader, down a bit. Now, as you see, same layer 1 for both. We need to get just that ID. And so I need this number, and the only place I can get it from is from the parent, which has all this other information. But there's the one that I want. So I want this to change with each of our layers. So back in here, I want the value of this to change. I want to call my parent again. So I'll start some script. Hashing curly bracket at parent.id. Get the idea, and we're going to use some basic JavaScript here to count in the characters. So if we look back at the container, counting across, there's 19 characters in, and then we start. So we're going to cut it down. So clicking on this, dot slice, 19. Close the bracket, hit enter. And we can see the numbers are still the same because we need to change anything that has the same ID will be the same value. So we also need to use this in our ID as well to make sure that it's a unique ID. And as you can see, we've got 1 and 2. Now let's just add a layer in front, space, layer 1, layer 2, and let's call this label underscore. You can see under here, label 1. Now let's do the same for the matrix, just to make sure the matrix isn't copying any values across. So we'll set this to the matrix and then paste that underneath. And that should still compute to matrix 1. So now we have a layer that will copy across however many times we need. So that we have that, we should be able to copy this whole clone, paste it again. This time, call this clone 3, layers 3. We'll change it to clone 2, and paste again for layer 4. Should be clone 4, layer 4. And lastly, one more. We have 5 layers now. Resolume project. Clone 5, layer 5. Now I can turn off the editor, and we're running just in normal mode. If we look at Resolume again, layer 1, clip selection and fader. Layer 2, clip selection and the fader. Layer 3, fader, clip selection. Layer 4, fader and clip selection. Layer 5, fader and clip selection. So we've very quickly built out all those controls, and we could keep adding just in this layer 1 any other functionality we wanted, and just it would auto-populate continuously. So maybe I want to have 16 of these buttons. 16, drag it out a little bit. I just move these to match. Now we have 16 clip trigger buttons. So as you can see, it's very quick to build out an interface using these sorts of JavaScript tools to make it a lot easier, rather than copying and pasting and redoing every single value. Now before we go, just want to make sure we save this session. So save, we'll choose where to save it. Resolume OSC. We'll just save that here, and we're good to go. Now I can minimize this, and because this is running on the web browser, I could also access it from a local web address. I need to open, and now I have control from this web page as well. Now if I wanted this to load automatically, rather than have to quick selection open recent, this is where I'd put it in this load function here to automatically load that project file as soon as it opens. I hope that's been helpful. Hit me up in the comments if you've got any questions or you need some help, and I'll try and make this project available so you can download the completed project and pull it apart and have a look at it on your own. That's OpenStageControl to Resolume.